In this video, we're going to be talking about best practices for blocking out our very simple organic kind of model. So you can see here that the fish that I kind of chose is the Garibaldi fish. The first thing I want to kind of point to is something inside of Photoshop. So if I hop on over to Photoshop, I want to show you that I want to make a document that's nice and square. If I go to image and then go to image size, the size that I chose, if I put this on pixels, is 2048 by 2048, and that should be very sufficient for what we need for that. Making a new document, that's pretty easy. You can just say File New, and you can choose and say what the size of that document actually is whenever you create it. Then it might be a matter of taking that image and then placing it, scaling it up. I've ended up flattening everything down. The other thing I wanted to point out about ZBrush is if you make a color of pure black within your colors here, whenever you go to pull that into ZBrush, it's going to read that pure black as transparent. So you might want to knock out part of the background for this. This became kind of fuzzy along the edges, and that's fine for what I was doing for this particular creature that I'm going to be sculpting. So in yours, you might have something that's a bit more specific for shapes, things like that, that you're trying to accomplish. Just go ahead and fill that with a pure black. The other thing that I wanted to point out is ZBrush can take different file formats like BMP, it can do JPEG, I believe, also PNG. But a Photoshop document is pretty easy to pull in. So if you just say File and say Save As, I'm going to be able to save it as a Photoshop document. I'm just flattening everything. So before I do that, I would go to my layers and just say flatten image and make sure it's a flattened version of Photoshop. So I believe it can pull in layered files, but that just could end up being problematic for you. The reason why I think it's easier to make this square kind of format is it could work with ZBrush and the Spotlight method. You could use the different method of using your grid and using it for that. You could pull it into Maya. You could get way easier and more predictable results if you use a square kind of format. So again, I'm going to suggest that you do that, save that out. And then pulling that in, I've already got video content on how to do the image planes, so it's not really worth it to kind of go over that again. But if we go into texture here, I'm basically using a spotlight, and if I hit Shift Z, I can turn the spotlight on and off. If I tap Z, I can get the controls for this. So I took the image and just kind of placed it within the center here, like that. On my interface, I've got cameras to where I've got a 3/4 camera and this spotlight camera. That's actually coming from the newer versions of ZBrush. If you go to Draw and you go down to the bottom here, you can do a store cam and make a new camera and name it, and you can do multiple cameras. You can rename the cameras. You can cycle through the different cameras that you've got within here. So that's a good way to save the camera information with the file that you have. So go ahead and do that. Set up your image for that. Make sure if you're using the spotlight method that you have spotlight projection turned off for that. So you want to make sure you have that off. That's actually exists under your brushes, and I'm trying to think exactly where that sits in here under samples, the spotlight projection. That's where that actually comes from. I've used it enough, I put it directly in the interface. Again, if you want to turn the spotlight off, you can just tap Z to turn off the controls for it. If you want to turn it off completely, Shift Z is going to do that. Within there, that exists within under texture, and you being able to turn on and off the spotlight and adding something to the spotlight, stuff like that, right? So this other thing that I want to point out is that whenever I was using Spotlight, I was actually just making a bunch of different shapes. And let me open up this folder that I've got here. I'm going to select one of the shapes, and I'm going to hide this U-mesh thing. So to make a folder, you just click New Folder, make a new folder like this. You got your different shapes, and I started off with a sphere and just kind of mashed that around and added just a little bit of sculptural detail to that to kind of indicate this is where the eye is going to go, and then here's the mouth, and here's the fins, and stuff like that. So you can see there's just not too much going on as far as like sculptural detail. And then I've got these other sphere shapes that I kind of mashed and pushed and pulled around to build the different shapes that we would need for this. So if I turn the whole folder structure on, you can see how we can keep this on these different pieces like this, like what we got. And this is going to make up the whole body of the fish that you see here. And it's going to be really easy to kind of select these pieces, holding down Alt, clicking on it, clicking on this one, and moving those around. And it was really easy to just add a new piece to this stuff. So if let's say we're on the body and we wanted to just append like a sphere to this thing, we could take the sphere and drag it into the folder structure like this, select the sphere. I was able to put it on the gizmo tool, just scale like this thing in, change kind of roughly what the shape of that thing was, and then just put it on tap 4 for my hotkeys, put it on the move brush. And then from there you can make your brush size pretty large. I'll turn on symmetry, tap X for that. And then you're able to just rearrange this stuff, kind of reshape it, kind of get it to be the shape that you're looking for. And again, if you need it to be thinner or anything like that, we can put it on the gizmo tool and we can scale that in. So that's how these different shapes were made like that, and you can name it, obviously select this, you can say rename. So I think being organized with that stuff is a good idea. After having all the different shapes on here, let's go ahead and take a look at the body here for this. So once everything's in a folder, you can collapse the folder so you're not looking at everything like that. And you can go ahead into this gizmo, this little gear icon right here, and you can just say boolean folder. And when you do that, it's going to go through a process. It's going to hide everything in the folder, and then it'll make this new U mesh that you got here. And I'll hide the folder and turn this one on. And then after that, if you take a look at the polyframe, kind of what it did, it actually makes polygroups for everything. And then I just ran a very simple polish feature on there. Then from there, if I take this and I duplicate this, we could just rename this thing and call it decimated, like this. And if we go to our plugins area, just click and drag this over here and dock it. If we go to decimation master, we can say pre-process current. It's going to go through a process of just analyzing the mesh and taking a look at it. And then from there, we can polygon reduce this thing. And what I think is pretty smart is just to make a proxy version of this thing very quickly. We could take this and put this on K polys and do something like, let's say 5,000 polys for this, and say decimate current. And I'm just going to put this on solo, so we're just looking at this one particular fish. And this should give us enough to throw directly into the game, take a look at it, or VR experience, whatever it is that you're creating. And it should give you a nice representation of whatever that shape is. It's also something that you can hand off to the next department, like say somebody in animation, or somebody's going to build a skeleton for this and start doing some very quick test animations. This should be everything that you need at the very beginning stages to get all that work done. So this is my suggestion to you for getting your project all set up, getting things established with getting your modeling templates in there, making some very simple shapes, using a folder structure, and then being able to union mesh that together, and then decimate it out to get a proxy mesh very quickly so all the departments can start working together quickly.